Here we Welcome to the Rockhouse Mag series of interviews. Today's guest is none other than Steve Williams, who can only be described as one of Australia's greatest guitar icons. Having such a diverse and talented playing style, Steve first hit fame with his band Wah Wah Nee in the mid-80s. Since leaving Wah Wah Nee, Steve has played with a who's in rock, including Australia's leading tribute to Led Zeppelin, Richard Clapton, the Fireboys, and the Party Boys. Most recently, Steve has released 2 of his own solo albums, which is a must-have for anyone's collection. Steve, welcome to the Rockhouse. How are you?
Hi, Jock. How you going, man? Hey, thanks so much for having me, and also thank you for those kind words, man. That's such an honour,
mate. It's an absolute honour from our perspective as well to have you here at the Rockhouse. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Mate, take you back to your early life, mates. What really inspired you to pick up the guitar for the first time?
Look, I mean, I was born in 1960 in the UK. I'm Welsh. I lived in the UK from 1960 to 1973. And I mean, let's face it, they were fairly important years musically. You had the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, T-Rex, there's so much amazing stuff, you know what I mean? And when I was a kid, the thing with the Beatles, it's hard to really see it for how huge it was, but it was a cultural phenomenon in the UK particularly. So you couldn't really avoid it. You know, it was such a big part of my life growing up. And I've got a brother that's 6 years older than me, and he played guitar. So he had, you know, there was guitars kicking around the house since I was little. And I think, you know, it was kind of like almost like everybody played guitar a little bit because of the Beatles. It was such a phenomenal thing, and just kind of get into it. And then what happened is I've been borrowing his while he was out, you know, doing his sort of part-time job, and I'd always get in trouble for moving it and stuff, right? You know, older brothers and all that. So eventually I hassled my mum for like ages, and when I was 11, she bought me a guitar. And what happened? It was such a great thing. Like, all my friends got guitars that Christmas, but they all got like really lame nylon string guitars with horrendous. She accidentally bought me an electric guitar.
Oh,
so I had
perfect.
an electric guitar, and I had a fuzz pedal and this little amp, and like I couldn't play really very much, right? But my sound was killer. So, you know, I had this. All my friends' guitars were like ding, 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 ding. My guitar was, you know, so. I think that was a really big thing, man, because like I played a riff and it sounded killer, you know what I mean? Whereas if I'd had this crappy sort of sound, I probably would have gone, it doesn't sound like, you know, T-Rex or whatever I was kind of into, you know. Shortly after that, after I got the guitar, maybe about like 3 months later, my friend's dad bought him and I tickets to see T-Rex. So we went to the Cardiff Theatre in Capital, the Capitol Theatre rather, in Cardiff. And we saw T-Rex, and like Metal Guru had just come out, so it was at peak T-Rex to see. So it was freaking mind-blowing, right? So I've gone along, I'm like, you know, 11 or 12 or something. And so I'm seeing Mark Bolan, this like super cool guy, playing a Les Paul with the killer sound, you know, like the full, like distorted, the best sort of distorted sound you ever hear. And like there's 1,000 screaming chicks. And so I'm thinking, this is interesting. You know,
I've discovered my new career.
I think a paradigm moment occurred. You know, a light went off in my little tiny brain, and it was like, this is a kind of a cool thing to do. I think also then, like, playing music was like, I mean, what else was there? You know, now there's so many options for kids, right? But there was kind of nothing. You know, so yeah, I just kind of fell into it, and I never found it difficult. I just sort of took to it. So I was off and running, and, you know, blah, blah, blah.
That's amazing. My mother did buy me one of those nylon string guitars. So, Mum, I know you'll be watching. Very much. Been sitting next to you.
Not too late, man. Get yourself a fuzz pedal and some kind of Stratocaster, and you'll be right.
Fantastic. All right, done deal. That's exactly what I'm doing after this the chat with you. Steve, when did you move to Australia then?
So then we moved to Australia in 1973, which was a couple of years later. So, you know, when I came to Australia, it was like a bit of a culture shock because I moved to Adelaide. My parents moved to Adelaide, and it's kind of like, I remember turning on the radio, and the first song I heard was Wake Up Australia by Brian Catt and the Bootleg Family. Now, all respect to Brian Catt, I've worked with him, and he's the most amazing dude, and he's actually incredibly talented. And one of my friends, Gus Fenwick, actually played bass in that band, right? So, but at the time, I'm 13 and I'm into hearing T-Rex and Slade and The Sweet and stuff, right? And I was like, what is this sort of country rock? I just didn't get it, man. I was like, what have we done? You know what I mean? And it was no, like, I think now too, like when a song's released, obviously it comes out everywhere, you know? Okay. But at that point, I remember like Australia was probably almost a year behind in terms of the singles that were getting released. So all the songs the kind of cool songs that were out, I was like, they're really old songs, man. Like, what you just released Hot Love, you know what I mean? When kind of they were onto Metal Guru and stuff, you know? So, yeah, it was kind of different. I mean, things have clearly changed, you know, considerably. But at that point, you know, and also I'd had kind of no interest, you know, sort of, I had no awareness of country music as such, and it seemed really country to me.
Okay. We will talk about country music a little bit later in our discussion, sure. Steve. But when you moved to Australia, were there any bands outside of that country feel that really stood out?
The first single I bought by an Australian band was Boney Maroney by Hush. And when you think about it, that could be a bowling riff. It's like, it could be woodland rock or something, you know, it's the same kind of riff. And the guy had the flying V, and they had like long hair, and, you know, not that it matters, but when you're 13, you want your rock stars to look like rock stars, you know what I mean? So I dug them, I thought they were cool, you know, and then, you know, shortly after, a couple of years later, I remember one of my friends at school telling me, man, there's this band and the guitarist is better than Richie Blackmore. And I was like, there's no way, like Richie Blackmore is the best guitarist like in the world at this point. And so we went along to see this band, and they were an unsigned band, you know, playing in this tiny little town hall, and it was called Chisel.
Wow.
And this was before they were signed, and Mossy, I remember standing up the front and watching Mossy, saying to my friend, he is as good as Blackmore. He actually plays quite a lot like Blackmore. And then we used to go see Chisel like all the time. In fact, they played at my school at lunchtime. It was 5 cents entry. And the thing with Mossy too is he's one of those freak guys that never got better. Like he was as good then as he is now. You know, he must have only been like, he was probably 17. I think he's a couple of years older than me. And I was probably like 15 at this point. So he's probably 17 or 18. And he was an absolute freak monster kind of player, you know.
Yeah, definitely. As you say, he still is today. So you started off in Cardiff, seeing some magic bands. You moved to Australia. You're starting to embed yourself in the rock scene over here.
Yeah.
What was your first foray? What were your earliest bands and your fondest memories from those early bands that you joined?
The bands I joined, like the first band I played in, that was real. We did some gigs. We had this school band called Sarkis, and we were doing, you know, like our whole set. Like we had a couple of originals we'd written that we used to do. Our whole set was Sabbath, Zeppelin, and Free. You know, so
pretty,
you know,
pretty big guitar heroes there, man.
We were doing some gigs, you know. I think back, and I've got photos of me in front of this like massive Marshall stack which I used to hire, and you know, it must have sounded horrendous, but it was great fun. And I remember doing gigs, and we had like, you know, like reasonable sized crowds because all the kids used to come to the gigs. So I immediately was like, well, this is incredible, you know. So then I started doing gigs. At that point, I was probably only like 16 or something.
Wow.
Yeah.
Let's now fast forward to 1982. You met Paul Gray, a talented musician.
Yeah, look, it was actually 85 I met Paul. What happened with Paul is I'd been in a band called Griffin that nearly got signed to Albert's. We were doing demos at Albert's because they liked the stuff we did, and we were probably going to get signed, but unfortunately the singer passed away. He was an amazing singer. He was kind of like a cross between Freddie Mercury and Jimmy Barnes.
Yeah.
And I can send you a couple of tracks. I've got some the Albert's recordings we did, and they're actually sort of pretty cool. So when he died and that fell apart, I was really like, man, I don't know what to do. And I was in Sydney, and I really didn't know, like, how do you do this? How do you become a musician? It's like, but I think that first thing is the hardest thing, right? So I literally said to my girlfriend at the time, look, if I don't get something happening soon. I'm going to split because Sydney's doing my head in. I'm going to move to Byron Bay and just hang on the beach. And then about a week later, I saw Paul Gray put an ad in the paper, synthesizer player 6 guitarist. So I rang him up, and then for about 6 months, we didn't even meet. We both had a Tascam Porter studio, and we just used to send each other cassettes back and forth. We ended up with 4 songs on this cassette tape. That was Sugar Free, Stimulation, I Could Make You Love Me, and Manchild, all of which went on the first album. And 3 of those songs were top 10 hits. So, it was a pretty strong kind of demo. We got a record deal immediately. The first record company we went to was CBS, which just became Sony, and they offered us a deal. So it was kind of easy. It was almost too easy. But I guess in retrospect, the product was like pretty strong. And we were 2 young dudes that, we kind of had our shit together to a certain degree. Paul was an amazing piano player. At that point, he was the piano. Do you remember the Midday Show? You might not remember it. You're probably too young, but there was a thing called the Midday
Certainly did. Show, yeah.
Yeah, so they had a live band, which was killer. And most of the dudes in the band were like older guys like my age now. But they had this young piano player, and that was Paul Gray. So he had this job playing, because he was a monster piano player, absolute freak jazz player. So he had this job on that. So he had some bucks, and he actually paid for us to do like a proper demo that him and I did, and then we took it to the record company, and then they gave us the deal kind of thing. Yeah, so
fantastic.
Yeah.
And that record deal paid off well. 86, the debut album was released. You mentioned Stimulation reached number 2 on the charts over here. My personal favorite, I Can Make You Love Me.
Yeah, that's my favorite.
There you go.
The unfortunate thing as well, one is we're known for Stimulation, but the live band sounded nothing like Stimulation, because just Paul and I in the studio mucking around, and we didn't even have a band at that point, so the live band really was more like I Could Make You Love Me. It had a much kind of more dynamic kind of edge to it,
and definitely some rock influence come out.
Sure, yeah. Look, with me, I mean, I've always had very eclectic tastes, and I remember thinking at one point, I kind of had a little bit of Mark Knopfler and Mossy kind of under control. And I remember when I heard Eddie Van Halen, in fact, Ian Moss was the first time I heard Eddie Van Halen. Ian Moss played a cassette of it. And I was like, what the fuck? Right? And I remember being like, I couldn't even get my head around it. It was so like, what is that? What is he doing? It's not even, like when I heard, for instance, Knopfler, I could sort of kind of hear what he was doing. But when I heard Eddie, I couldn't even figure it out. I was like, that doesn't even sound, it sounds like classical organ or something. Because I'd never seen, there was no videos or anything, so I didn't even know that he was like that. I was like, how the hell does he do that? So, within like 6 months of him hitting the scene, every guitarist in the world kind of sounded a little bit like him. He really was such a massive kind of, change, an influential change in playing styles. And I remember sort of thinking, do I want to be like sort of Nile Rodgers, or do I want to be like Eddie Van Halen? When you're young, you're sort of stupid, right? So I was sort of thinking, what do I do? Like I was a bit confused, and then I thought, I'm going to do both. So my style was, particularly in Maloney, was quite eclectic, because one minute I'm doing kind of this funky Nile Rodgers kind of stuff, and then I'd get my short little bursts of solo, and it was never, because we weren't a rock band as such, there was never like, hey, you can solo all day here. It was always quite short little bursts. So I try to sort of whack in as much as I could in that little 16-bar section or whatever, and there was huge, not saying I play like Eddie, but there was huge influence from him in what I was doing.
Look, many have tried to emulate Eddie ever since he first came out with that Eruption solo, mate. So, unbelievable guitar player.
The thing with Eddie too that freaks me out, I mean, sure, he's the most amazing lead player, right? But his rhythm playing is freaking incredible. Like, I remember the first Van Halen album, the way it was recorded, you could actually pan it left or right. So the rhythm guitar, I think, was on one side and the lead guitar was on the other side. And me and my friends, we used to all just let's listen to the rhythm guitar side, and we'd listen to just, and like things like Jamie's Crying, the riff in that is just,
oh, it's crazy.
A lot of guys that can play kind of like that, you got your Ingwe Malmsteens and your Satrianis and Steve Vai and all that. but none of them have that essence of rock that Eddie Van Halen had. Like no one has had it. I don't think everyone ever will. Like his rhythm playing is so kind of, it's just got so much about it, you know, it's incredible.
Oh, look, just an incredible band as well. You know, you talk about emulating Eddie. I tried to emulate David Lee Roth, and that didn't work out well for me either. But as a unit, they were just amazing in those. Yeah, exactly. You had your third top hit with Sugar Free, and around this time, you met someone who remains an influence in your career, being Simon Napier Bell. Now, Simon Napier Bell is probably the manager of all managers when it comes to rock music, having managed T-Rex, Yardbirds, and even Wham. How important was Simon to the success of
what happened with Simon was, you know, we'd obviously had considerable success in Australia. So our publisher was a guy called Chris Gilby, and he was a personal friend of Simon. So he called Simon and said, you know, there's this band in Australia, you should check them out. They've done a lot of good stuff. So Simon flew out to Australia to meet us, and I remember we were playing on Hamilton Island, and we went for a meeting. At this point, a bunch of managers were kind of courting us, like the guy that managed Fleetwood Mac had also come out to meet us. And so we went to dinner with Simon, and I remember like, hey man, how's it going? Right, what's happening? Who's he managed? And he goes, T-Rex, and I was like, yeah, where do I sign? Right. Look, Simon's a friend of mine, and we still talk quite a bit, you know, on the phone and on Zoom and stuff. And you know, he's the most incredible guy. I tell you, he's the best guy to go to dinner with. His stories, and it's not name dropping either. It's just matter of fact. Like it's just like, yeah, well, I was under the table once, and John Lennon was tripping and happened to walk past me while under the table in some night. You know, what I mean, just these hilarious stories that you just like. But they're his peers. You know, he's the most amazing guy. He's like 82 or something now, and honestly, he's no different. He's one of those people that hasn't changed really at all. He looks exactly the same. He's so switched on, man. It's insane.
Wow. You're very blessed to have him in your career then.
Yeah, absolutely. And what happened with Simon is like, once we signed with Simon, he organized all the overseas stuff. So next thing we're in Japan, we're doing gigs in Japan and Thailand. We went to America, we did all the stuff in the States, and we were in Europe and stuff. So we had quite a bit of success overseas, which was largely due to Simon's kind of contacts and stuff, you know what I mean? So, I mean, we probably could have done stuff anyway, but it certainly gave us that foot in the door kind of thing.
That's awesome. You even cracked the top 40 in the US as well. So
we did. Look, regionally, we had like Sugar Free, for instance, was top 5 in Los Angeles. But what happened is like they loved us in Los Angeles and Philly and places like that where they were into like funky kind of modern stuff, right? But I imagine in Texas they would have hated us, you know what I mean? They would have hated us, so we didn't do particularly well there, you know. So regionally we did quite well in some areas. I think nationally we got to like maybe 30 something, 32 or something like that with Sugar Free. Yeah, so you know, we did okay, and we were in America for quite a long time. We did a lot of TV shows and stuff there. We did like Solid Gold and Top of the Pops. In fact, when we did Top of the Pops, and this is on YouTube, Valerie Bertinelli was the interviewer, right? So I'm like, man, this is us. I said to Paul Gray, this is Eddie Van Halen's wife, man. I've got to say something to her. And Paul was like, if you say something to her about Eddie, I'm going to kill you, right? So I was like dying to. And a really funny anecdote, like also on that show was Guns N' Roses. They'd only just come out, like they weren't really huge yet.
Wow.
And I was in the band, I was sitting outside the band room waiting to go on, just sitting there minding my own business. And then Izzy Stradlin came up and started talking to me. And he was super friendly, right? And after talking for about 5 minutes, this dude comes along with no shirt on. And I'm like, oh, who's this guy? And then Izzy goes, hey, Steve, this is Slash. And my immediate thought was, bad name, man, you're going to need to change that because, you know, at this point, Slash meant going for a wee-wee, right? I mean, Slash didn't exist. No. Now, if you think of Slash, you think of him. But the funny thing was, I was chatting to them both really friendly. Paul Gray comes up to me and goes, hey, we got to go on, man. And now, as we're walking away, Paul goes to me, when are you going to stop hanging out with those heavy metal losers? I'm like, and I was like, hey, they're really friendly guys, man. You know, like don't judge them just because they're rock and roll guys, you know. And then, anyway, but 3 months later, they were the biggest band in the world. And I remember we were back in Australia, and I said to Paul, do you remember those heavy metal losers? And he's like, yeah. And I said, well, that was Guns N' Roses, and they're currently the biggest act in the world. Maybe I should have like hung out with them a little bit more, you know.
Yeah, exactly. You talk about rhythm guitarist, Izzy Stradlin's right up there as one of the best, right?
Incredible. I mean, they were I love them, and I love Slash's tone too. I think he's got such a beautiful sound. He really does. He's got almost got the modern Les Paul sound, whereas Jimmy Page and those guys have the kind of pre his sound. It's not as sort of creamy and distorted, but yeah, he's a lovely player.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, my knee come to an end in '89, but you kept being busy. You joined a lot of classic Australian acts. James Freud from the Models started up a solo career. The Mamas Darlings, and of course Richard Clapton. You played with all of those three. What was your learning from James, the Mamas Darlings, and Richard Clapton?
Look, I did a lot of gigs. I was very fortunate. I guess what happened was after Wamani, I kind of had a bit of a profile, so suddenly I was getting a lot of offers, right? So James Freud was an absolute amazing guy. I loved him. It was so sad when he died.
Yeah.
He was the most hilarious guy, and he was probably, out of all the people I've ever known, the biggest, most natural rock star. He just he had it in spades. He just oozed it, and he was really funny and charismatic. And you know, I mean, funny story with James is that the album he did, which I actually played the tour of, I didn't play on the record. He did the album in America, and he had a bunch of different session players play on the record. So he had Earl Slick from David Bowie's band play the lead parts, and I think it might have been Nile Rodgers that played the kind of funky rhythm stuff. So when he came back to Australia, he was putting the band together, and Nero Swan, who's the guy from the Machinations, he's the bass player. He's a good friend of mine, and he's a really good friend of James's. I didn't know James at this point, but James had said, who do we get on guitar? Because at this point, like everyone does it now, but the ability to play kind of the funk rhythm was quite sort of rare here, because no one really did it. And James said to, Nero told me this later, James said to Nero, who are we going to get who can do both of those styles? I don't really want to get two guys. And Nero said, oh, there's only one guy that you should get, and that's Steve Williams. So I'm sitting at home, and there's my phone rings, and it's James Freud, and I'm like super excited. Hey, this guy from the Models calling me. So he said, do you want to be in my band, blah, blah, blah. And I said, yeah, no worries, man. Like, and I just gave him my address, and I said, you know, yeah, come around it was a tape at that point, right? And so I expected him to come around like in an hour or two. About like 30 seconds later, there's a knock on my door. He'd been calling me from the freaking phone box outside my house. It was so hilarious, right? And I was like, dude, that was quick, you know. So he came in, and like, you know, we immediately hit it off. He was so it was just great, you know. I was so excited to do that show. That was kind of the first gig I did after One One E. So you know, it was like a whole thing, and then after that, I did, you know, a bunch of stuff. So I was very lucky to get lots of gigs. You know, I think there was so much work back then that you could do that. You could get like, you know, stacks of gigs and stuff. So
that's fantastic. Richard Clapton.
Yeah, look, I only did a couple of gigs with Richard. I didn't do a lot of gigs. In fact, I think something like I'd known Richard socially. I'd always run into him at a gig in Sydney called the Manson Room, and always have a drink with him and a chat. And he was a super friendly guy, and I loved his material. I always did. He's one of the best Australian songwriters. So anyway, he rings me also, and he said, "Oh, look, Jamie, who was his regular guitarist, I don't know, he hurt his hand or something, and he couldn't play." So Richard said to me, can you do the gig? We got a gig tomorrow. And I said to Richard, hey, look, I can do the gig, no worries, but what you're going to have to do is not play any songs that I don't know. So you're just going to have to play like your hits. You can't do any of those album tracks that, I didn't say this, but that no one really wants to hear. You know what I mean? So he was cool with that. So he put this song list together. He came around to my house. We did the show, right? And I think it kind of worked out great, because it was like the best of. It was only the hits. And he's got many, you know, so it was a really strong show. And I did the gig. I think I did like I can't remember. I think I did like 2 or 3 shows. And, you know, it was great. Playing the guitar part in I Am an Island was just incredible, you know.
You would have felt like you were in heaven at that point.
I loved it. This is really like, this is, incredible,
Yeah, fantastic. From there, in 1990, you joined the Party Boys. The single "Do Diddy" was released around that time as well.
That's right.
Vince Condorino, who we will talk about a little bit further in the email, but in the interview. What was life like with the Party Boys?
To tell you the truth, it was absolute torture. I kind of hated it because we did a 2 or 3 hour set, and it was triple F all the way. Now, what triple F means is really loud, right? There was no dynamics. It was just full rock. And to be honest with you, it kind of almost killed me. It was too much, right? But I mean, it was a great gig to do. And I met Vince. That's where I met Vince. So we had a great time. Unfortunately, what happened with the Party Boys, it was, I think there was an airstrike or something, but I remember we were meant to fly, and at one point we had to do this massive drive, and, but it went on for quite a few months, so yeah, it was good fun, but I certainly was quite relieved when it ended.
Yeah. From there, you joined the Choir Boys, another Australian rock institution.
Yeah, look, I did the Choir Boys. That was a little bit later. Yeah, I did join the Choir Boys for a little while. I'd actually, that was great fun. I mean, I really like those guys. They're a great bunch of dudes. So I did that for a year or two. It was great fun.
That's awesome. Awesome. I want to talk a little bit about Vince. You and Vince were together in arguably Australia's leading Led Zeppelin tribute band. How did that all come around?
What happened with Vince is I met him doing Party Boys.
Yeah.
And then we sort of, we knew each other, right? So then, many, many years later, I'd moved to Adelaide. My mum, who's passed away, was quite sick at this point, and she was elderly. So I thought, I'm going to move to Adelaide and just live there for a few years because I don't want to miss out on her life, right? So I moved to Adelaide, and then I got this gig teaching in this music school. And I'm walking along minding my own business, and here's Vince. He's the singing teacher there. So he's like, what the hell, right? So, he said to me, hey, we should put a duo together, and we can do this cafe gig that I can get us, right? So I was like, cool. So I kid you not, for about a year, we'd get together once a week, and we were going to rehearse, right? But all we did is we had coffee and pastries. So for about a year, we'd so slackline, we just talked because we couldn't be like, man, like what's telling, we were just shooting the breeze, right? Eventually, Vince's girlfriend at the time said, this is ridiculous. You guys have been rehearsing for a year. I don't think you even know one song yet. So she booked us a gig. We had a gig in 3 weeks or something. So we're like, fuck. And it's that classic thing, how do you get a muso to get their shit together? You give them a date.
You give them a date, yeah.
Give them a date. But so suddenly we had to get our shit together. So we did this cafe gig, and it was huge, right? So we ended up doing it for 10 years or something every Friday, and it was just killer. It used to go off. So after doing that for a couple of years, Vince, then he'd been asking me for a while to join Zepp Boys. And at that point, I'd never played in a concept band. So I was a little bit kind of not sure, right? So eventually I did it because I loved Zeppelin anyway, right? So I did and I did Zepp Boys for about 6 or 7 years. And then eventually I quit. So, but it was great fun. And then we did some big shows with the orchestras, and, Vince is amazing. I actually played recently with Vince. We did that Hall of Fame thing together. So he's a great guy. He's a really good friend of mine. He's also got an album out, which I played guitar on.
Yeah.
It was released a few months ago, yeah.
He has just released that album.
Yeah.
His album is fantastic. The 3 tracks that you mentioned, you just bring diversity to those 3 tracks. Nowhere to Run has that funk element in it. What's Going On is that bluesy feel. And then So Close, probably the token ballad on the album, which is a very laid back feel that you bring.
Yeah, look, if you actually listen closely to the album, I actually play on more than those 3 tracks. I play on probably about 6 or 7 tracks, which, he didn't credit me on, that's fine. I wasn't even expecting to be credited. What happened with that album is because he sang on my first album, I said to him, I'll play on your album, right? So then I was in town doing a different gig, right? And then he said to me, can you come into the studio and do one solo? And I was like, sure, man, no worries, that's easy, right? So I went he did it in a proper studio. So I went into the studio. And the thing was, we were going to do one solo. the tracks had been pretty much done, right? So I was just the kind of the icing on the cake. But so I did one solo. And I mean, you know, I'm actually pretty quick in the studio because I've had a fair bit of experience. So I did a couple of takes, took about 10 minutes, and then they used that. The guy that was producing the album said, hey, do you want to play on some more tracks? And I was like, hey man, like whatever, right? So just roll the songs and I'll just kind of jam along. What ended up happening is they literally rolled tape, and the producer guy, he was yelling out the chords to me while I was jamming. So literally what you're hearing is me just reacting to the tracks, right? So we ended up doing, you know, about 6 or 7 tracks that evening in about, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours. So, you know, and I kind of thought, you know, the next day I couldn't remember a thing I played. I wouldn't be able to tell you the songs or anything. I'd say it was just very spontaneous. And then when he released the album and then he sent it to me, I was like, wow, there's quite a lot of my stuff on here. And also you've mixed me right up in the mix. So I was quite sort of, you know, pleasantly surprised. But, you know, I've spoken to Vince about it, and what he said is that they spent so long working on the record that everything was in its place and everything had been structured really well. So he said, what I brought to the record was a kind of sense of spontaneity and almost like crazy kind of wild rock and roll kind of stuff, you know what I mean? Because it was very, very much an honest kind of interpretation of just my initial thing. I always find also that when I'm recording, if I do something like 2 or 3 times, it doesn't get better. It just loses that initial kind of, there's a real visceral kind of response when you're hearing something and automatically playing along with it without thinking about it. Once I hear something 2 or 3 times, I can tell what the chords are, then I'm kind of thinking structurally rather than just, you know, in an honest kind of way.
Definitely. Being a part of Def Leppard in the recording of Hysteria would have done your head in then. What was it? 2 years of recording, so.
That what you're thinking of the Def Leppard Hysteria thing. I didn't play on that. What you're thinking of is the guy that sings on my album. He sings that song Addiction off my first album.
Yep.
He did all the backing vocals on Def Leppard's Pyromania album, right? So he's an amazing guy. Like I'll just talk about him briefly. Terry Slessor. You obviously remember Free, yeah? Paul Kossoff from Free. Yep. After Free split up, Paul Kossoff had a band called Backstreet Crawler. They're absolutely one of the best 70s rock bands ever. Criminally underrated. They should be as big as Zeppelin and the Beatles, and you know, wow. So they're amazing, right? Terry was the singer in Backstreet Crawler, so I'm friends with him, and he sang on one of the tracks. And in fact, I've just finished my 3rd album; it hasn't been released yet. And Terry sings. We co-wrote a song, and he sings on that as well. He's an amazing guy, like incredible voice, kind of a little bit like Paul Rodgers, that kind of thing.
Paul Rodgers, another great name there.
Yeah,
I'm going to walk the clock back a little bit because we have spoken about your diverse style of playing. You couldn't have got more diverse, knowing the backstory of your life.
Yeah.
Than joining Lee Kernaghan for his Snowy River Arena Spectacular in 2002. Was that a challenge, changing your style to fit more?
Look, with that, I mean, I personally never liked country music. I always thought it was lame and hokey, right? Because I was kind of more into jazz and hip stuff, right? So I got booked to do that gig. And I was like, it was that massive Man from Snowy River show. And my first gig was actually in Perth. At that big like thing with a weird roof. It's like a tenty sort of thing, right?
Yep.
So anyway, when I got the gig, I kind of went into it a little bit apprehensively, but the cash was amazing, right? So I'm like, yeah, cool, man, yeah, I can do that, no worries, right? So, but what I found is that it actually turned my attitude around considerably because the guys in this band were just monster players, like bluegrass kind of players, right? So I did the gig and I was kind of okay, but it wasn't really my style. But then I was like, I can kind of fake my way through most stuff, but I've never really looked at country because it's never kind of been my thing, right? So I bought a banjo and I bought some bluegrass stuff, and I've got into a guy called Brent Mason. I'm not sure whether you're aware of Brent Mason. He's the most incredible guitarist. Guitar Player magazine described him as Eddie Van Halen raised on corn. What? Yeah, he's mind-blowing, right? So I kind of got into that, bought a Telecaster. And I really immersed myself in playing bluegrass and country sort of chops for ages. And then I was like, cool, okay, now I can put that away because I've spent 2 years doing that. And what I found is that, okay, my rock playing is better now because I now have a better understanding of the rootsy bluegrass sort of stuff, which, I mean, if you listen to Jimmy Page has got a really big country bluegrass thing going on. That's when guys, you know, guys that play the metal shredding thing, it's actually really different to Page. Page doesn't do that at all. He's more country rock on steroids, really, you know what I mean? So that was a good learning experience. And what I found is, you know, in a way, if you want to get better, you should work on stuff that you're the worst at.
Definitely.
Which is kind of what I've always done. I mean, I don't need to practice certain things because I've been doing them for so long. So, you know, I did that. I mean, look, I did Sydney Jazz Conservatorium after Wallonie, and I learned jazz stuff. So after Wallonie, I immersed myself in learning jazz and stuff. So I've always tried to make it expand my abilities a little bit by doing that, by looking at what I'm crap at. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. That's a good lesson for new and aspiring musicians out there. Know what you're not good at, and just
Look, there's a famous Miles Davis quote where Miles Davis, I can't remember who it was, but one of the musicians asked Miles why he didn't play ballads anymore, and Miles said, because I love ballads.
Wow.
Which might sound stupid, but I get it, because what it means is, okay, so he's comfortable doing ballads. So because he was a true artist, he always wanted to put himself into a situation that he wasn't comfortable in, because that's how you grow and come up with new stuff, you know what I mean? So I think, you know, I also get bored really quickly. So if I kept doing the same thing, I'd be like, oh man, I'm just going to watch telly, you know what I mean? I find it more stimulating to do that, to try and look at other kind of things, you know what I mean?
Certainly do. And you trying new and different things, it's littered throughout your career. And there's a number of names that we haven't even spoken about that you've played with. Ray Parker Jr.
Yeah, that was weird. I did a gig with Ray Parker Jr. for a whole tour around Australia. It was actually a corporate gig for Reebok. Remember Reebok? They were like an 80s shoe company. Like, so I got booked to do this gig with Ray Parker Jr. and I'm playing guitar, and it was really cool, man. He was such a great guy, and I actually went out with him a couple of times, you know, like just to hang out, and it was quite amazing. I mean, he's, you know, people know him for the Ghostbusters thing, but he's actually got much more. He was in the Headhunters. He's played with Miles Davis.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, he's an amazing guy. He was a lovely guy, really friendly. You know, amazing talent. I remember remember the other woman song?
Yes, I do.
So there's that bit in that where it's and then the harmony comes in. So we're both playing that together. It was such a buzz, you know, because he didn't play a lot of guitar on that gig, but he just kind of joined me on a couple of little things.
He's an absolutely talented guitarist in his own right as well.
Yeah, no, he's amazing.
Yeah. Interesting. We interviewed Martin Motnick from Accept, and he had the pleasure of playing with Ray Parker Jr. as well, and said the same thing. Talented, amazing, brilliant guy.
Awesome.
John Lord, what's your connection with John Lord from Deep Purple?
I did that. Have you seen that concerto for rock band and orchestra that he did with Deep Purple and the London Symphony Orchestra? So
yeah,
he came to Australia and he did that with the Adelaide Symphony Orchestra. And I did 3 shows with it. And it was like, I got to say, when I got booked for the gig, initially I was like super excited. I was like, yeah, man, I'm playing with John Lord. He's my absolute hero. And then about 2 days later, it kind of hit me. I was like, oh, crikey, that's right. He's used to standing next to Richie Blackmore or Satriani. This is challenging, right? So I'm kind of like grabbing my pants, right? So then I actually don't get nervous normally at all, but I kind of got quite scared. And then I remember the first rehearsal, we had a rehearsal with the orchestra, but he wasn't meant to come. He was meant to come the next day. So I'm sitting in the like cafeteria before the rehearsal, this is early in the morning, and in walks John Lord, and I was like, oh, here he is, right? So he came over and sat with me at the table. He walked straight in and he just spotted the musos, like the actual musos rather than the orchestral players. Came over, sat down, super friendly, played with me. I was kind of quite nervous, and then after I did my first solo, he was like 4 or 5 feet away from me. He turned around and gave me the thumbs up, which kind of totally disarmed me. And then I felt comfortable, and he was amazing. He was such a friendly dude. zero ego at all. Incredible player. I remember jamming with him at the sound check, and we're playing the theme from Wallace and Gromit, like me and John Lord, you know, like. It was like surreal, man. And I'm like, kill me now. Like, this is incredible, you know?
Yeah, definitely. You've also met the guys and had your own fan experience by Photobombing Spinal Tap. How did you?
I mean, look, what happened with that gig? I was actually doing. I did Craig McLaughlin's band, not the Mona one. After Mona, he had an album, right, which didn't do particularly well, but he had an album. It was kind of a bit Bon Jovi-ish right now.
Yeah.
Craig had been a Y1E fan, and also he did Rocky Horror when I did Rocky Horror, so I kind of knew him, right? So when he was putting the band together, he booked me to play guitar. So we were doing Hey Hey It's Saturday. So we've done the show, and then we're coming off stage right now. I'm literally with the two guys that I'm playing with. Craig wasn't there. And we're sort of heading down this corridor. We turn around the corner, and literally there's Spinal Tap. They were also on the show, and they're in full gear, right? And it was like when life meets art, because we were all kind of dressed up with our skull boots and, you know, pointy hair and stuff and leather jackets with skulls everywhere and shit, right? And then there's Spinal Tap, and we kind of just stopped, and they just kind of looked us up and down like this. It was just hilarious. And the Nigel Tufnell dude, he didn't really speak much, but the bass player, what's his name, Harry Shearer, my God, he was so hilarious. He was so hilarious. It was such a funny thing, you know. Yeah, that was a real thrill. You know, I've got a lot of photos of famous people, and, you know, because I've been fortunate to meet some pretty cool people, but I've got to say that Spinal Tap picture gets the biggest response.
That doesn't really, such really does. But for what they are, right? I think they've only released 2 albums as well, but
incredible. I mean, it's kind of funny because in a way they're parodying like rock, but they're the most famous rock stars of all.
Aren't they ever? The Stonehenge video has to go down as one of the funniest movie moments of all time.
Just brilliant. But I must have seen that movie like 100 times. It's just hilarious.
Likewise, it's great. We're going to move to what you're currently doing. In 2017, you joined another iconic Australian band in Matt Finish. Matt Finish formed in '79 and had a huge album with Short Note. How did you come along joining these guys, who, by all accounts, are still touring very strongly?
Yeah, look, I've known John Pryor for a long time. In fact, since the '80s, we've been friends. And John had mentioned to me about doing a gig, and I was always like, man, I'm a huge Matt Finish fan. I had that Short Note album like everybody did when I was in my early 20s and thrashed it. Such a great record. And I was always like, I'd be messaging John, when are we going to do these gigs, man? Because he told me I'm going to do some gigs. I was like hassling him, mate. So he's like, be patient, man. Like, we'll get it. It'll happen, right? So then one day he rang me, goes, okay, we've got some gigs. So we started doing some gigs, and we do those. We generally do those big shows that are run by Empire Touring, where they have like 10 or so what they call heritage acts, which actually means there's old guys that used to be in famous bands. So we do those shows, and they're amazing shows because they have huge crowds, massive production. You do like maybe between 3 or 5 songs each, because it's a series of bands. It's all, easy gig. It's just a joy to play, and I love the material. It's such great material. So, we occasionally, we haven't played for a while because we had a few things booked and they got cancelled because of COVID, like everything. And then we had a gig booked this year. I think it was in like maybe April, which was again one of these really big kind of outdoor festival shows. And what happened is New South Wales had those floods, and because it's a stage outside, before you did those shows, they sent engineers in like a few weeks before to assess the moisture content of the ground, right? And apparently it failed, it didn't pass, so they couldn't put the stage. The show got cancelled. I was like, man, like COVID and now floods, like what's going to happen next? It'll be like an alien invasion that puts the gig off. It's just impossible.
Yeah.
So, quite frustrating. But I talked to John regularly, and we're looking at picking it up again. Once things hopefully get some sort of normality to them.
Fingers crossed, mate. Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
But COVID has, changed people's lives quite significantly. But you really utilised the time, the downtime, and released two fantastic solo albums. October 2021 saw the release of Surrey Road. A highlight for me personally is When I See You Dancing. That's just a quality track there.
Thank
But
you.
you followed up soon after and released Deja Vu.
Yeah. Look, what happened is, prior to the lockdown, I was working so much that I never really had time to do my own thing, So I was always just the gun for hire, and I was always kind of one of those dudes like, oh, crikey, man, I need to learn that solo because I was doing so many different shows. I need to work on this, blah, 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 that, which is great because you're gigging and you're making money and stuff, right? And you're doing what you do. But what that also means is that you don't have time to do your own thing, right? So what lockdown meant, and I live in Melbourne, so I was in that massive lockdown that went forever, right? Where you couldn't even go out the house. So that enabled me to then, I started like, it's time to start doing my stuff. So rather than just sitting around and moping, which I kind of get, I just threw myself into that recording project. I put out Surrey Road, which went pretty well. And then I put out the Deja Vu album. I've actually just finished the next album, which I'm going to have to hold off for a while because Deja Vu's only just come out. And last night I started working on the first track from the fourth album. So I'm getting way ahead. That's a good thing. If I get hit by a truck or something, my kids can release it,
Yeah. Your approach to the first two albums were completely different. In Surrey Road, you used a lot of guest vocalists, but a conversation with Simon, we mentioned Simon Napier-Bell before, for the 2022 release, really changed your thinking and challenged you to do the vocals.
That's right. Look, the songs on Surrey Road were mostly fairly old songs that I'd had kicking around for ages that I just hadn't done much with. I wrote a few of the songs for the Surrey Road album, but because I've been lucky to work with so many great singers who are my friends, I thought, I'll get these guys all to do a track or two, whatever, right? So it worked out really great, right? But then I always send whatever I'm working on, I always send it to Simon for his opinions, right? So Simon's brutal. He's brutally honest, which is great. That's what you want when you're asking people for criticism. You don't want them just to say, "Oh, that's great, man, that's great," because no, that's meaningless. I'd rather you say, "This sucks, and it sucks because of this," right? So, what Simon eventually said to me, I sent him a song, "Little Lamb," which is the one second album, right? And then he said to me, "Can you send me it with you singing?" And I said, "Well, I don't really sing." And he said, "Well, you must sing it because how did you write the song?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I write the song and I sing it myself, but then I send it to a singer and I get them to read the vocal." And Simon said, "Look, I want to hear you sing it." So I sent him the track with me singing. And he said, "Look, you're not an amazing singer, but you sing well enough." And he said, "Quite frankly, it's better. I prefer your voice because it's an honest representation." And he said, "Because they're your lyrics, you actually deliver them better and it's more honest doing your own thing." And he said, "Plus also, if you're serious about doing a solo thing, you kind of need to do that, So because I respect him so much, I was like, crikey, what do I do? So I sort of did a few songs, and then I sort of played with a few people, and everyone was like, "Yeah, it sounds okay," So eventually I got the courage to do it, and at first there was a little bit of trepidation, but now I'm okay with it. And what's happened is like the singing on my third album, I think, is much stronger. I guess it's like anything, you just get confidence and you get better at it. And I think, the more you do stuff, the better you get at it. Because I'd always been working with incredible singers, I'd never really had any real reason to sing, you know what I mean? And also when I was young, I kind of always liked, I'd look at bands like Yes, Steve Howe, AC/DC, Angus, Jimmy Page. Those guys don't sing. They play guitar. And that always kind of appealed to me. Jeff Beck, who's a huge, I'm a huge fan of. They don't sing. So I kind of thought, like in my little teenage mind, that's cool, man. I want to be that guy, just the guy that's like playing the guitar. And it's kind of cooler, than being the singer, So that's kind of where I was at, but that's all changed. So,
mate, the track Bouquet of Life is, I'm just drawn to that song, and the track itself goes for 8 minutes. 4 minutes is a massive intro, and then it leads into just this epic classic, even if I can say it, arena rock style ending part. The song itself would not, be that different from anything that Pink Floyd or Roger Glover on Butterfly's Ball has on that track. What was the inspiration for this song in particular?
Look, when I write, and my approach to music generally is that I have no kind of parameters that I feel I need to work within. So that song's very different to everything else, right? So the way I look at it, if I'd made all the songs like kind of When I See You Dancing, for instance, as much as I like that, I would get bored with that. And I think also it's a little bit one-dimensional, whereas to me, the fact that Bouquet of Life is so different to the other tracks, to me, I think it gives a little bit more depth. And I think also the couple of tracks leading into that are a little bit quirky as well, like the one before. Weird. It's almost a bit like Stars in Your Eyes. It's almost a bit like, like an indie rock band, like, I don't know, like the Psychedelic Furs. I mean, I'm really into that sort of stuff too, so there's a little bit of that sort of influence going on there. So I look, as much as I like sort of funky pop and rock, I'm about more than that too, so I think I want to, diversify a little bit. My third album is more guitar-ish, right? There's less keyboards on it. I'd been listening to a lot of Robin Trower, who I absolutely love. And I was thinking, I might kind of go, not consciously, but I'm kind of steering a little bit in that direction. So I think the third album is a bit different. It's kind of different again. It's a little bit more rock.
And are you contributing vocals on this record as well?
Yeah, I am. I sang most of the songs. I've got Terry Slesser, the guy from Backstreet Coolers, singing one. We co-wrote it. And I've got John Kenny from the Rock Melons doing a couple. So, I do have a couple of songs with other people, but I'm doing most of it.
Yeah. I mentioned at the start of the interview that Surrey Road and Deja Vu must have for anyone's collection. Where can we find copies of both of those albums?
Surrey Road is available on all the streaming services, like it's on iTunes and Spotify and all that. It's also on my Bandcamp page. So if people want to buy physical CDs, go to my Bandcamp page, right? You can also buy the download there. The Deja Vu album I've put on my Bandcamp page, but I haven't actually put it on any of the streaming services yet, because it's actually been picked up by a record company and they're releasing it, I think, in September. GM are releasing
awesome
it.
News.
Sorry?
That's awesome news. Congratulations.
Yeah, no, it's good. Like they've already released the single Pump. So that's on the streaming services. And so that's going to be coming out. So I've kind of held off on doing that myself, which is, to be honest with you, it's a little bit hard because I'm so, I just want to get stuff out. I just want to put it out. And because, I finished the third album. So they're just releasing the second one. This is a little bit the problem too. I think that all writers and people that do music have is that if you're doing it, it's really, when I'm on a roll, I wrote 5 of the songs off the Deja Vu album in 1 week.
Yeah,
so
wow.
I think when you're on a roll, it just keeps going,
Yeah.
When you stop, I think you lose momentum a little bit, you know what I mean? So, yeah.
Steve, you've had an absolutely amazing career, from starting off with Wawa Knee to playing with a who's who in rock across the world. It's just been absolutely amazing, but it's really been culminated with the peers voting you into the South Australian Music Hall of Fame.
Yeah, that was a trip, man. I honestly didn't know what to expect, and I was kind of a little bit weirded out by it because I'm thinking, like, what is this? Like Hall of Fame? Like, I'm not worthy, that kind of thing, right? But when I did it, I have to say it was such an amazing evening. It was so warm and the crowd was so beautiful and such a great vibe in the room. And it really did, I'm not really that into sort of things like that, but I have to say it did actually really mean a lot. And to get recognized by my peers and some of the people that are already in there, like for instance, I was looking through the names and there are some serious names. And then I come across Ian Moss. Yeah, I'm in. Right.
That's awesome, mate. An absolutely spectacular career.
Thank you so much.
What would be the best piece of advice you would give to young and aspiring artists entering the industry today?
Look, I think the industry's changed so much that I don't really know, but the one thing I would say is just keep going. What's gotten me where I'm at? Just sheer determination, and I just never stopped. And I worked so hard and I put in so many hours. And, you know, I mean, I was crap for ages, but I kind of eventually got okay. And just sheer doggedness, you know, like I'm just going to keep doing this. And I think I've just committed myself to music 100% my entire life, which is kind of hard to do. And I know that everyone can't do that. But, you know, I just think if you give it your all, really, and just don't stop, and you know, you're going to have lots of disappointments on the way and lots of setbacks and people telling you that you suck and all this stuff. And you just got to suck all that up and just like, you watch me, you know what I mean? And just keep going, and just kind of believe in yourself. And I think you got to love it too. You know, if you love something, it's kind of easy to do it all the time.
Yeah, definitely. That's really good advice. One final question, Steve. You're keeping busy. What's next? What can we expect from Steve going forward? Obviously, we've got the third album out, but what else is going on?
Look, at the moment, with the post-COVID, I honestly can't tell you because everything's been cancelled. I've got a few gigs coming up. I play in a Deep Purple show called Machine Head, and we've got a couple of shows coming up. It's a killer band. The singer's amazing. The band's killer. I love playing that gig because Richie Blackmore, I absolutely love him. He's an amazing player. It's great fun. You know, so I'm doing that. That's just kind of a little side thing. I'm really focusing on my own stuff and trying to just record a lot. I've got a little studio and I really want to put some gigs together, but it's just not really the right time to do it because of the whole situation. It's too like it's fraught with risk at the moment. Like, you know, airfares are getting cancelled, and so I'm just going to kind of sit it out for maybe another, you know, 6 months to a year. Hopefully things might change, and then I want to do some shows doing my own stuff. So yeah,
that's fantastic. We all look forward to that.
Thank you so much.
On behalf of Rockhouse Mag, I really appreciate your time. This has been a fantastic interview and some really good insights about how successful your career has been.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, man. Thank you for having me, and it's been great to talk to you.
Thanks, Steve. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
See ya.